Welcome to the Banff World Media Festival. Your session is about to begin.
Right, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Nikesh.
Morning, John.
You had a good sleep in the mountains?
Wonderful.
Wonderful. Let's,
Some people as well. Look at them, they're all awake.
well, let's start with the sobering subject of advertising. It's rather grim out there, and digital advertising is showing signs of perhaps even flatlining for certain sectors. What are you hearing out there?
I mean, in terms of advertising, there seems to be two trends, right? One trend is people are shifting, consumers are shifting to spending more and more time with internet-enabled content in some way, shape, or form. So you are seeing people spend more time on iPads, on their laptops, on their phones. So you are seeing the audience moving, shifting behavior. As a consequence, many large advertisers are spending way more attention and probably money in the online world. So I think that's clearly an effect which we're seeing, which is sort of trend breaking, if you will. I think coupled with that, you are seeing a bit of a secular trend which sort of goes up and down with the economic environment in any market around the world. So I think like any industry, advertising is not immune to economic impact. So we're seeing both. But I think it's the interplay of both of those in every country which give you a sense whether online is still growing and the rest is staying flat, or online has become big enough that it is staying in line with the overall advertising trend.
Advertisers are very excited and perhaps confused about social. What are you hearing out there, both from advertisers and from users, and where do you see trends going in the social sphere in the next 12 months?
I mean, from my perspective, I think what's happened is, as many of us are spending more and more time in what we've called social media, it's evident that advertisers also want to spend time trying to figure out how they can target those users, how they can advertise to them, how they can make their services and products sort of visible to those advertisers. But I don't think that social advertising has come to rest in terms of we all understand exactly the value of social advertising. From our perspective, and we see it slightly differently, and the way we see it is that the web has gone from being a web of information to a web of people. I mean, there was, I don't know, 5 or 7 years ago, 10 years ago, when all of us started interacting with the internet, I'm pretty sure, at least I know for me, my first email account was not with my real name. I wasn't sure how this email thing was going to happen. I thought my work email was my real email, and my personal email was sort of good to communicate with friends with, but I was not inclined to go get my real name as my email account. And I don't know how many of you felt that way. I'm sure as it related to credit cards, I was loath to put my credit card information for a very long time to buy anything on the internet because I'm like, oh my God, I don't know, once it goes into this ether world, something's going to happen. Right? So you better have your phone ready next to you. God forbid somebody charges something, so I'm going to be quickly calling and canceling my card. And thank God my liability is $50. So I think we've come a very long way from there. All of us are reasonably willing to spend money on the web, use our credit cards, are willing to declare our real names. I think it's pretty lonely on social networks if you don't tell people who you are. It's very hard for them to befriend Pink Panther or Smiling Monkey or whatever your names were. So I think we've come a very long way. And as that begins to happen, we're all coming to realize that we are going to use our real names on the web. The web is a reflection of society. Now, as that begins to happen, the web is going from being impersonal to being a web of people. And what we're going to rely on, as there's so much information being created every day, we're going to rely on our friends' recommendations in certain instances, whether it's a restaurant, whether it's a product. You're more likely to click on that link which says, oh, 5 of your friends actually bought this yesterday, or 10 of your friends ate there and they like it, as opposed to just the web saying, oh, this is the top restaurant in Banff. So as we head towards that, I think social information is going to enhance the quality of information across the web around the world. And that also will enhance the quality of advertising. Now that's possible in sort of an open web. I don't know how you do that in closed networks. And that, I think, opens up tremendous opportunities for advertising, but I don't think we're there yet.
What was your first email address?
I can't remember now. Take the 5th.
There's an interesting contradiction there, though, that the web is worldwide, it's mass, it's global, social is very small. How do you see that contradiction sorting itself out?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if the way I sort of liken it to for some of us who are old enough, to the corner newspaper shop or the corner tea shop, where many years ago, you'd read the newspaper, you'd go, you have a conversation with your friends, or people will congregate in some sort of community. And what's happened is the web is now reflecting the same thing. When you're having a conversation with 6 friends on a Google Plus circle or on Facebook, you're actually talking to the same 6 people. You just happen to do it virtually. I still am in touch with my friends I've known for 25 years, and some of them are in India, some of them are in Singapore, some of them are in London, but I can still go back and relate to those 10, 15, 20 people in the community, and I'm more likely to discuss politics with those 20 people because I'm comfortable with discussing it with them than I am with you. Or similarly, my 15 friends in Silicon Valley, I'd much rather discuss nice restaurants in Silicon Valley with them as opposed to people in India who are unlikely to know where I'd like to eat. So even though social is small, I think the different groups we form in life can be reflected in our social experience on the web. And I think that's going to make information extremely useful. And we like to make advertising extremely useful as well in the same way.
The challenge for many of us in mass media is how to insert ourselves in those small spaces. Who among us has figured that out?
I think, and I'm not suggesting, you and I have had a long conversation, so I know you understand this area as well as anybody else at Google as well. I think the key is not to think about inserting ourselves into the social conversation. The key is to think about how the current technology is enabling a whole new experience. And I think I was watching the awards last night, that interactive game, or the game in the ZDF TV show that somebody designed. That's quite innovative. If you think about it, they've actually used every media in what it's best at to try and reconnect the audience in a way that people get engaged. You can lean back and watch it. You can lean forward and get involved on the web. You can watch it as a TV show. So they've tried to take a look at all forms of media and recreate a new experience based on enabling technology. So I think almost like you have to go back to the drawing board and innovate from the beginning and say, now that I have these various opportunities to interact with users, whether it's a Twitter, a Facebook, a Google+, people can search on the web, people can find videos on YouTube, and they can sit across and watch TV, or they can watch programming, whatever they want to. I think that context is useful for people in the creative world who are thinking about developing new formats or new ideas. That's how you have to think about it. And then advertising will follow. Right? At the end of the day, when people watch a lot of stuff, it gets monetized either by me paying for the content or somebody wanting to advertise on it.
You mentioned, we had a good conversation last week, and you mentioned, if I can quote you, that we're in the dark ages of digital advertising.
Early ages. Yes.
Early ages.
Close. It's different. Early is better than dark.
Yeah,
right? Your
dark
future,
before light.
You're early in your career, or your career is dark. I'd rather be early.
We're in the early stages.
Yes.
What do you mean by that, and how do you see it? How do you see it advancing?
I like to break down things into simplicity for myself because the world gets very complicated. And if I look at the internet, if I look at the internet protocol, for me it actually does 3 fundamentally different things as it relates to media or as it relates to our user experience. Right? First, for the first time, it allows interactivity. If you think about past media, it is very hard to interact with my newspaper. It doesn't talk back. It doesn't do anything if I click on it or push hard on any ad. So it was very hard to interact with any form of media in the past. Most media was broadcast media, in a way. Radio or print is another form of broadcasting text to you, in a way. So 1, it allows for interactivity. 2, I think it allows for personalization. Now, I don't need to see the same thing as you. And you and I read the same newspaper, but tomorrow, my newspaper can look slightly different than yours based on my interests, right? So interactivity, personalization. And the third thing which it does is it eliminates the barrier to distribution and communication. I can put something on the web today, right now, and it can reach a person in Korea, in India, and Africa at the same time. I remember trying to get the Financial Times in India many years ago, and you'd have to wait for a week, and you'd get Monday's newspaper. Now, it's kind of useless in today's context to get a week-old newspaper. The world has moved on and changed. And that has changed, right? So you can do interactivity, it can be personalized, and you eliminate barriers to distribution and communication. Now, if you look at today's advertising, especially where the bulk of advertising spend is, which is in television, none of those features are currently exploited or used very well in video advertising. Most video advertising is still a 15-second clip posted on the web in front of your video, which was designed for television. And for those of you who are in the creative world, I've said this before, but if you go look on YouTube, there's an old Barbie ad from 1959, which is probably the first ad on television. And actually, it's a man moving a doll with his hand to a radio jingle like that. Now, we laugh because our instinct is, oh my God, can you not think of where technology has come and what we can do? I saw French fries walking and dipping themselves into ketchup by themselves. You know? And here's a man moving a Barbie doll. So we've come a long way in television advertising. And I think similarly, as we start to embrace and explore the opportunity of interactivity, of personalization, and this fact that you can distribute instantaneously, we're going to see very different advertising show up in the next 3 to 5 years. And I think that's why we're in a very early age, because right now we're still trying to adapt to the new media as opposed to create for the new media.
Are there any other regions, countries in the world that you see significantly more advanced than North America?
You know, the UK has been extremely surprising, actually. The UK has, I'd say, is on the leading edge or bleeding edge of digital advertising because for some reason it's a compact market. The companies have moved faster into the world of online advertising. The US is not far behind. But if you look at most large agencies and most large creative groups, you'll see many of them have actually gone ahead and either made acquisitions or set up special teams who are exploring this idea of creativity and how do you bring in the elements of interactivity, how do you bring in the elements of personalization, how do you bring in the elements of this quick distribution. And you know, what's fascinating is I think given there is so much information that is created, advertising is going to have to become very, very interesting for me as a user to want to consume it. You know, right now we don't have a choice. You sit in front of your television, and if you're still not TiVoing it or recording in your DVR, you have to watch an ad. You are forced to watch an ad. Now on the web, there are formats which allow you to skip ads. That format which allow you to sort of pause ads and go do something and come back. So ads have to become way more interesting now, I think, in the web.
Is that happening anywhere?
Oh, there are some very interesting examples of, you know, lots of campaigns, and I'm sure everybody saw the Old Spice man who was doing different things. There's another campaign which is a whitener where you white out text, and they have done very interesting things on YouTube with an ad campaign. So people are exploring lots of interesting ad campaigns out there, and it's going to be fascinating to see how that evolves.
You've mentioned in other forums a coming collision between the internet and television. When do you see that collision happening?
It's always dangerous to try and predict timelines because then somebody remembers, they've watched a YouTube video and say, in 2012, and you were sitting with John too early in the morning for you to remember anything, you said, like, holy shit. No, I wasn't. So I'm not about to make a prediction because it's a short way to, you know, being quoted the next time. But I think it's fair to say, I don't know, how many of you actually went to CES or have you kept track of the TV industry? I was in CES in January, and if you look at most new televisions, they're all coming with an internet connection in the back. They are. Now, the moment you stick an internet connection behind a TV, it just becomes a very big iPad, right? And you can do everything on that screen that you can do in most screens in your house. You can do what you can do on your smartphone, you can do what you can do on your tablet, you can do what you can do on your PC on a television screen. I think the number is about 5.5 hours of television watching, roughly a week by people. And if that screen is so easy to use, and you and I can watch the video from the last night's awards, from that interesting, you know, that entertainment category thing or the thing from the interactive game, we're most likely, if 5 of us are trying to watch it, we're not going to all crowd around your iPad. You can say, wait, let me just watch this on our TV. So your screen is going to start behaving like yet another screen in our life. When that begins to happen, then that line between what I watch in broadcast mode versus what I watch on when I want to mode is going to change. And I fundamentally believe, I don't know how many, a lot of people here look like they could have kids. I have one, she's 16. She does not understand the idea of watching television at a particular time. I don't know, that idea of having to sit in front of a TV at 7:30 when something's going to be broadcast and catch it at 7:30 is lost on her. And I'm sure that's true about most kids out there. Their trend is she'll record it, she'll watch it later, she'll probably download it on her computer from iTunes or something, or she'll watch it with friends when she wants to watch it. So if you believe that's the trend, we all hate to be bound by certain timelines. I can remember missing an episode of something twice and losing interest in it because I hadn't watched it for the last 2 times. It's sort of the link is broken. Now that link can be sustained when I get an email saying the new episode is now available for downloading in iTunes, right? So now suddenly you can watch it when you want to watch it. So if that becomes the consumption behavior of users of content, then the notion of broadcast changes. What doesn't change is their need for content. People are still going to consume content because content is still what we all consume. We still read news, we still watch videos, we still listen to some form of radio. But how we consume it is going to be different, which means it has to be distributed differently, it has to be made available differently.
Content has a very different impact depending on the screen that it's on. Something looks and sounds different on a 52-inch screen with surround sound, whether it's web delivered or broadcast, than it does on an iPad. For the content producers among us, do you see us having to make a choice between going to the small screen or the big screen, or will it matter?
I'm hoping that technology gets us to a point that you create content once and technology figures out how to deliver it on a different screen with a different quality and a different speed. I think putting that onus on content creators is very hard. I think content creators are very good at being creative and creating great content. If you get them trapped in the idea of having to design for 7 different screens, then it gets a bit more messy. But I've seen people crowding over phones and watching videos at restaurants as much as I've seen people crowding over their computer or trying to figure out a way of getting that on TV. So I hope that the technology industry does not make it onerous for content creators to have to build in different formats.
Hasn't so far, has it?
I'd say, again, it's an evolution. We're sort of in the midst of a transition, and as that transition sort of works through, as it evolves, hopefully we'll see that it's going to become easier.
I want to focus a bit on video and video production. In terms of the video revolution, do you feel we've passed the inflection point, or is that still to come?
Not at all. I think we're in the early ages of get this right. Yeah. We're in the early ages of the video revolution. I think a lot of people who are in the audience, a lot of people who are here this week, are eventually the people who are going to create these interesting formats, these interesting ideas. I just think that we will go to very many new formats and new ideas which we haven't seen yet, because it's very hard for anyone like me or you to sit here and predict it. It's going to come out of some 3 or 4 people working in a small room in a garage somewhere. They'll come back and say, look at this new format I've created. It's very interesting. You can watch this on your phone, you can watch the clues, and you can do this over here, or you can do, it's just going to come from the creativity of people. I don't think it's going to be a 30-minute traditional or 24-minute traditional show that shows up on television, which will be the only format that we consume.
One of our great challenges is cost management and somehow bringing our costs in line with the revenue that a lot of channels like YouTube deliver. At the Globe, we did a video series that was quite popular, successful. We then went and figured out the cost that went into it, and it was about $20,000. And the revenue was about $5,000. So a big loss for us. That was sobering. How, and I'm sure others in the room have had that experience, how do we align costs with revenue?
That's a very good question. I think that's going to be something which a lot of people have to worry about. I think part of it has to do with 2 things. One is it's happened to newspapers, it's happened to the music industry, it is happening to the video industry in some way, shape, or form. I think part of the opportunity is that the web is global, and a lot of our thinking is still restricted to national boundaries. You still design formats and programming for a country. But that's not true anymore on the web. You can launch something which actually can be consumed by people around the world. So a little bit of thinking has to go in that we are now targeting an audience of 2 billion people on the web. It's no longer an audience of X million people in one particular country. That's hard because that's not how we're programmed, no pun intended, in terms of how we design our content. You have to think about the global audience. Today, if you took a traditional piece of programming, the number of lawyers and number of agreements that have to be done for that to be available around the world, I suspect, somebody told me from your industry, it's probably in excess of 30 to 40 lawyers are required to get one piece of programming across every country in the world, and it probably requires negotiation with about 100 broadcasters. And I may be getting my numbers wrong, but I'm sure that's sort of the order of magnitude. So, and it could take 6 months. So just imagine creating, the process of creating content to getting it to the end consumer or the end viewer requires 6 months and so much effort and so much cost. If there was a simple way that you could do a deal with a YouTube or a Hulu or any other video platform which could make it available on the web. And they had monetization in place that actually created similar value of revenues for you. I think that would solve some of the problem. But I do understand your issue, and I think some serious thinking will have to go into how do you adapt to the new cost structures of IP-based platforms. And some people will make changes in the creative process. Some people will increase the distribution opportunities around the web. Some people will choose more efficient platforms for delivery of that content. But I think that there's a bit of a challenge there.
We'd probably have unanimity here that it would be good to get rid of the lawyers on the creative.
I don't think that's what they're saying at a legal conference not far away from here.
Talk a bit more about the creative process and the distribution process, and maybe give us some examples of who out there is managing their costs more smartly.
Well, I think what's interesting is that we're in the world of instant feedback. I was in London a few months, I think 6 weeks ago, and we had a big event called Zeitgeist, and this 11-year-old girl called Maria Aragon, who was singing for an audience similar to this audience of people. She's 11 years old. And her claim to fame is she was discovered on YouTube because she sang Lady Gaga's Born This Way. And Lady Gaga saw it. She called her to open a concert with her. And from there on, this young girl has had 50 million views of her video on YouTube. Now, that's way more compelling talent discovery than us putting people in a room and doing an audition and hoping she's going to be good or not. And there's many examples. There's a guy called Ed Sheeran, who's now on tour with Snow Patrol. He had a similar story. He didn't take no for an answer. He's just become very popular. He was discovered on YouTube. So I think there are ways where you can do pilots and test them on the internet and get feedback on the internet on various blogs or social networking platforms or YouTube. So I think the process of discovery is going to change or can change because a lot of talent now has to prove themselves. And imagine if you're a newspaper, would you hire somebody fresh out of college who didn't have a blog and who couldn't show you they've been writing for the last 6 months, right? My 16-year-old girl is posting videos on YouTube on how to do makeup and how to groom yourself. That's the current fad. I'm sure it'll change, as we know, with 16-year-olds. But that's what they're doing today. So the process of talent discovery has to change because people are putting themselves out on the web and showing what they can do. I mean, the process of creativity changes. Some people are exploring in terms of how to get various creative minds to collaborate and do creativity different. So I think there are a lot of different models being explored out there. But I think it's fair to say the notion of an expert is going away. And the notion of wisdom of crowds is more out there. So I'm pretty sure you can put 3 pilots up on the web, and you can tell based on feedback from people which one is likely to be more successful, and then you go ahead and invest in those. I do feel that in the next few years, large content brands that we know well are going to get more expensive. I think it's going to be harder in the middle. So the Harry Potters, the Bonds of the world, or the Lady Gagas, the Madonnas of the world are going to get more and more expensive, or football events or sporting events.
Expensive to the buyer, to the user?
Expensive to the advertiser, as in they will get more valuable. Because everybody knows that brand, and that brand can be distributed globally, and everybody wants to use that brand to lure audiences. So they're going to get more and more expensive to the advertiser, expensive to the people who are trying to distribute that content. I think the stuff in the middle is going to be a little more hard-pressed because if you think about it's a constant battle between distribution and content, right? Even in traditional worlds and broadcast worlds or even newspapers, people still pay for exclusives and scoops and they put them on the front page and sell a newspaper. That's the idea, because something that is on the edge, breaking news, actually gets people to pick up that newspaper or magazine and pick it up and buy it. So that becomes exclusive and expensive content. And I just think with the global web, where the audience is now 2 billion people as opposed to 50 million in a country, 100 million, you're more likely to pay a lot more if I could take that piece of content and distribute it globally simultaneously.
So the global brands will become more valuable. That's why probably the LA Dodgers went for $2 billion and so on.
Or formats. I mean, I was having dinner last night and I was learning all this wonderful stuff about how formats go from country to country, and there are people who buy a format from the US, they use it in Canada, they develop it in Canada. Those formats will become more and more valuable because, do you want to have Big Brother? Everybody knows what Big Brother is. So if you could have Big Brother in every country in the world, it's much easier than trying a new one called Big Sister. Is there one like that?
You said the middle is going to get a lot hotter.
Yes.
Who are you thinking of? who's up against the greatest
I
challenge?
don't think, I mean, you guys understand this industry much better than I do, so it'd be unfair for me to try and pick particular brands. But I think the point is, it happens today, right? If you buy a cable lineup of 200 channels, there are 3 or 4 channels or 5 channels for which you actually get compelled to pick one bouquet of channels versus the other. But then there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle which you get as part of the package. But I'm sure the broadcasters don't pay that much for USA Today or USA as they pay for an ESPN, right? So everybody wants ESPN. It's got a lot of sporting content in it. You have to have it. But then as part of the package, you get 40 more, 50 more, 100 more channels. But they're not as valuable as the one which has the premium content.
You said advertisers will pay more for to be associated with the successful global brands. Do you think users will be paying, and will we be paying more for access to those products?
No, I think users have it good. I think all this internet revolution that is happening is actually good for users because we're getting access to information way faster than we used to. I've grown up in India. I've been in various parts of the world where people don't have access to content. You cannot get a newspaper as quickly as you can. You don't get half the video programming that you'd like to get. You can't watch movies for months altogether in various parts of the world because the teams haven't gotten there to sign the distribution deals. So I think the fact that all of us can get access to information and entertainment faster is a good thing. So I don't expect that we as users are going to end up paying more. I just think we benefit from the speed. And to be fair, the content providers benefit from the opportunity of having access to that information, right? Or having users having access and making more money. And if 2 billion people can buy a song, it's much more valuable from a revenue perspective than 500 million people buying that song.
The pay concept, though, has been proven. Would you agree in music and film?
The pay concept is a proven concept. I mean, I know that most people here are, at least in most developing parts of the world, are very happy to pay. And I don't think that it's fair to think that emerging markets or some of the different countries which are in the emerging markets are not willing to pay. You have to understand, they never had the opportunity. You can launch a movie in the US today and it doesn't get to countries in Asia or in certain parts of Africa for 3 months or 6 months. Now, what does that young kid do who wants to watch a movie which is not released in the country? So why don't we flip the paradigm? Why don't we make it available and then see if you can solve the problem of people not trying to get it from legal means?
But if I understand you correctly, you think that advertising will continue to pay for the bulk of content?
If you go back, I've said, my view is that content has always been paid for either by advertising or by subscription. And you can still buy a medical journal where you pay $100 a month for subscription because very few people want to read it, so it has to make up for the cost of production, like you alluded to earlier. And there are free newspapers in the world. You can pick them in the subway in London and leave them there, and many people read them, and they get funded by advertising. So I think content spans the entire spectrum from advertising/sponsorship to subscription, and very often both. So I think that model is not going to change. People are still going to consume content either by paying for the content or by tolerating advertising in the midst of it, or having somebody sponsor content for brand affiliation reasons. I think that's going to continue.
But there's 3 big variables in the economics of digital: the cost of the content, the user and their willingness to pay, and the advertiser or sponsor willing to be associated with it. Which of those 3 is going to have to adjust the most?
That's a good question. I think given that the advertising part has changed drastically because the audience has exploded. If you can get a piece of content right, if you launched a new Harry Potter movie, I know they're not doing one, but if you launched it, imagine you launched it on the web. I think it's a big enough brand globally that we could get tens of millions, if not more, people to try and watch it in the first week. And if I could find a way of getting them to pay $5 each, you can make a lot more money than just watching it, releasing it through Windows across various formats across the world. So, the audience has exploded. The advertising rates are not as robust in the online world as they have been into the traditional world. So I think the advertising paradigm has to shift tremendously. I think on the subscription and paid for content notion, we just need to make sure that content is more easily available and distributable to the end user. It's not just restricted to a particular device that you're carrying, or it should be available to every device that I have, and should be easy for me to use, and I shouldn't have to pay multiple times for it. And if you can get there, I think you're going to see that the new paradigm is going to replace the old paradigm with not a whole lot of revenue loss. But what is going to happen is the players might shift in terms of market share depending on who gets there faster versus the others.
How much interference do you anticipate from some of the device manufacturers?
Define interference.
Efforts to control a market.
You know, I think the idea of trying to control anything is a bad idea. I think businesses should be in the business of facilitating end users to be able to consume and do what we want to do. If my television tries to control me, I feel very scared. If my phone tries to control me, I don't like it. I want my phone to be utilitarian for me. I want it to satisfy the needs I have, but getting my phone to control me is a very scary thought. So it reminds me of those dark ages where devices could control us, which is dangerous. But I think, look, everybody's trying to figure out how to get a share of the pie. So people are trying different models. But I think in the end, what's going to happen is you are going to see open models where people will innovate. You know, Android for us is a great example. We designed the software. Many hardware manufacturers have adopted Android. We have over 900,000 being activated every day, which is a big number. And OEMs take it, they build phones with it. You know, lots of app developers put apps on it. We have 450,000 apps. And it's a wonderful ecosystem which allows for tremendous amounts of innovation. It's not as elegant as closed ecosystems, but it continues to innovate. So I think what's going to happen is this industry is moving extremely fast. And it's going to require a lot of people to sort of move in lockstep and constantly innovate. I don't think any one player can innovate for the long term in its entirety. So we're going to see a lot more innovation come from various open players out of the market.
How fast before we see a Google phone?
You already have a Google phone. I mean, look, we have a Nexus device, which is, see, he's got one right there. See? That's that fast.
Yeah, a phone
right
with
now.
a big G on it. I want to take you back to a point you made about content producers needing to think of the global market. Canada has a very protected, or has had a protectionist approach to media. We have ownership restrictions. We have a lot of government support for content, all in an effort to have Canadians producing media content for Canadians. Should we as Canadians be getting away from that?
Well, I think my view is that, you know, how do you make the most economic impact with content? You produce it once and get everybody to watch it. If I could produce one piece of content and get 7 billion people to watch it multiple times a day, I'm sure it's going to make a lot of money. So I think trying to artificially restrict the potential for distribution of great content is you're restricting or crimping the opportunity for it to make a lot more money. If you can create great content, you should find a way of getting a lot more people around the world to consume it. Because it's, unless somebody pays you for everything, in which case they have to pay a lot of money if it's successful content, right? If I only restrict it to 20 million people or 50 million people, I'm restricting the opportunity for that content to be seen by billions of people out there, or at least the potential. So I think over time, given that the distribution mechanisms exist for every one of us to consume it around the world, I don't think we should restrict content to geographical borders in the future.
That's happening anyway, right?
I think those things will fall over time. I think what's going to happen is people are going to create content. They already do. People create content for the web. You know, the young lady, Maria Aragon, who's put her video on YouTube, she's not thinking about only people in the US watching it. She's got people watching it from the Philippines, from India, from Africa, and from Korea. She's got 50 million views. They're not all from Canada or from the United States. And she's become popular on the back of those 50 million views. Lady Gaga goes to India and does a concert. Everybody in India knows who she is. They've not figured it out because it was content only created for the United States. They figured it out because she's on YouTube, her songs are available. So the whole idea of content is to get it to be popular around the world. And a lot of the technology platforms of today allow that to happen.
When I look, if I'm reading this correctly, YouTube's list of media partners in Canada, the top 5, I'm going from memory, are all global players. BBC, Discovery, Al Jazeera, I think is up there. CBC might be number 6. Is that common around the world?
You know, I remember the early days.
YouTube, that is?
I remember the early days of YouTube. People, when we bought YouTube, people were wondering why we spent so much money in buying what was potentially a user-generated content platform. People were putting videos of their cat doing strange things, or little kids. We used to joke sometimes that many videos had an audience of one, which was the person who uploaded it because they wanted to watch it. But that has changed over time. People have started putting more and more content on there, and it's become a very large distribution platform. A lot of users go there. People spend a lot of time. I think, funnily enough, Canada is one of our big markets in terms of YouTube video consumption. People, on an average, watch 294 videos who watch it. We have like 7 million minutes a month, which is second only to the social networking business in Canada. So thank you very much. I think it's very popular here. I think over time, at the end of the day, as I said, a lot of content producers want their content to be watched. I mean, what's the biggest thrill? What's the biggest joy for a content creator? Have a lot of people watch their content. I think, was it Chuck Lorre who said last night, thank you, Canada, for embracing my shows. They're very successful here. So every content creator wants their shows, wants their content to be watched as much as it can be. And I think a platform like YouTube allows that to happen. Many broadcasters who are very good at what they do understand that opportunity, and they're partnering with us to make sure that the content is available to the end user.
But if I'm a Canadian content producer, I look at those numbers and realize I'm up against these global giants, can't compete with them. How do I survive?
Look, I think at the end of the day, there's a phenomenal amount of unbundling going on. As in, the end user doesn't think about content as a broadcasting company. We don't say 2.5 Men. Who broadcast it again? Mm-hmm. We think about 2.5 Men, right? You don't think about The Big Bang Theory as owned by a particular broadcasting mechanism. We say, oh, who produced this? How do I get it? So I think over time, users connect to pieces of content or pieces of programming. They don't connect to a broadcaster or a packager or a distributor as much. And they will go seek it out wherever it's available. So I think the best way for media players to think about it is how can they support, produce, groom, enable great content, which is going to be sort of lapped up or embraced by users. So it doesn't matter if people know me as CBC or not, if 100 million people are watching my content, because that makes me more successful than somebody else whose content is being watched by 50 million people. It doesn't matter who the broadcaster is.
Right.
So I think that's the opportunity.
And that makes broadcasters inevitably irrelevant, doesn't it?
Look, there's a lot of information out there. You could say that same argument about newspapers, and it hasn't happened, right? I mean, the Financial Times is still the Financial Times on the web.
But it's happening to lots of smaller papers.
And that's what I said. I think stuff in the middle is going to be hard, because how many brands can you consume at any one point in time as a user? I can consume 3-4 newspaper brands, 4 or 5 magazine brands, 4 or 5 brands of content, and I use that term very broadly. So there is a physical limitation, a mental limitation for us to create the mind space in our brand. I mean, we all consume a certain number of brands, and I'm pretty sure if you think about your life, over time you gravitate to 5, 6, 7 brands. I'm sure you have your favorite grocery store you like to shop. You like one more than the other. I'm sure you have certain clothes you like better than the others. So we all gravitate to brands. And to me, a broadcaster is a brand. And if that brand can constantly produce great content, I'll say, oh, I always like their programming because they produce great content. But I do think, to your point, it is a global field. Now you have to try and compete on a platform where there are multiple brands available being exposed. I mean, I'm pretty sure if somebody said something extremely controversial at Banff and you did a Google search, half an hour later, you'd find 300 articles about it because everybody in the world has picked it up in various media. Now, there's no way you and I are going to read 300 articles on a particular piece of content. So there is an oversupply in some cases of content. So you've got to figure out what your brand means in that new global world. In the past, it was great. You could send 300 journalists to a particular event. They all went back to their countries, national borders. In Chinese, it was written by 3 journalists from China. In India, it was written by 3 journalists. In the US, it was written by 3. Now, those people are 9 people writing the same thing, because we can all read them in English. We can all get it translated to whatever language you want. So there is a bit of an oversupply in certain areas of content, which will, over time, rationalize itself as people gravitate towards a certain number of brands.
Although if I understand you correctly, you've stressed that the product brands, be it Harry Potter or 2.5 Men, have great and growing value in the marketplace. The ones in the middle, the distributors, including newspapers, may be more challenged. I
think, again, it's very hard to create discovery. How do you take the next show that you're doing and get 200 million people to remember your name and want to watch it every week. I think that challenge has been a challenge in the industry for time immemorial. It's not new, because that's the holy grail. If I can get every household in the United States to want to watch that piece of programming, or every household in Canada, or every household around the world to want to watch it, I've made it. And how do you go from starting a pilot to getting to that point, and how many people will get lost in the middle is the question, right?
We've been talking about global opportunities. What about local? Is there much of an opportunity for local content?
I guess there is, to the extent, and I think let's go back to something we started talking about, we haven't talked about, is engaging the people and getting them involved. And to that extent where the local community gets involved, people get involved in smaller groups, and there is a grassroots connection to content, that's another opportunity out there. How do you get the users engaged? And I think, going back to what the internet does, it allows for interactivity and engagement. And we haven't spent a lot of time figuring out how brands can engage with people in the future. And I talk to many CMOs around the world. They still struggle with the idea of having social networking pages and seeing 5,000 pieces of comment. They launch a new product, they launch a new toothpaste, and there is a web page or a Facebook page or a Google Plus page, and suddenly they have 5,000 pieces of feedback. What do you do with it? Do you change your product? And some companies spend 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years working on a product and putting it out there, and they have 10,000 pieces of feedback. What do you do with that feedback? Usually our way of getting feedback was we put people in a room, put bright lights on them, gave them $50 and said, what do you think? And said, these 30 people really liked it, therefore 3 million people are going to like it. And that was our way of getting feedback. Now you can get feedback instantaneously, whether it's programming, whether it's product. I can sell a product today out in the supermarket, and I'm pretty sure by the evening I can get 1,000 people to comment on it. So part of the opportunity out there is figuring out an engagement model of getting the users engaged, getting people engaged, because all of us have an opinion. Right? So how do you get people engaged on a grassroots level, on a local level? I think that's a phenomenal opportunity which hasn't been tapped, because nobody's quite figured out how to incorporate feedback and how to sift it and how to get people to actually come along this journey with you. Traditional models have been, you go, you create something, you put it out there, and you watch your figures, as in sales figures or your viewership figures.
Isn't local content, though, fundamentally challenged by the lack of scale to cover the costs?
Yeah, I guess to your point, that local content will definitely have a lower production quality, because one of the risks you have is that you cannot produce it to the quality that you can produce content which is going to have global consumption, or you're just going to make less money on it.
Yeah. You mentioned your investment in YouTube. Has it paid off?
I don't know, you tell me. I'm pretty sure many companies would happily take YouTube from us if you wanted to for lots of money. So I think, yeah, I think it's an extremely valuable asset. I think it is one of the platforms of the future in terms of how people will consume content, and it's not a secret. Most content producers know it. We have hundreds of channels now where people are producing content for YouTube. We had a very successful event a few weeks ago in New York, which was Brandcast, where we had advertisers and content creators come and watch the different channels that were out there, which were being and a lot of advertisers paid money to sponsor those channels. So we are trialing different things to see, can there be made for internet content? Because we're just realizing content that is made for television has so many legal issues around it and rights issues. Sometimes it's just easier to make content for the new platform, so you don't have to worry about 100 lawyers trying to negotiate in 170 countries.
Mm-hmm. What are the greatest challenges for YouTube?
I think, as I said, we're in a transition. We have to iterate. We have to make sure that the content on YouTube is relevant to the end user. We have to make sure we partner with major content producers around the world, because at the end, users like to consume great content. They don't come to YouTube because of YouTube. They come there because they find great content, both user-generated and content that is obviously partnered with great content producers. So I think part of our opportunity is to make that happen. I think the other opportunity is to make sure that it's easy for people to be able to access YouTube on any screen that they like. And I think we're doing a reasonable job. You can access it on most screens that you have. So I see it more as an opportunity as opposed to a challenge.
Is there a concern that the big content owners, the brand companies, will want to develop and invest in their own channels rather than YouTube?
No, we actually encourage them to invest in their own channels, and we just want them to distribute the channels.
All channels within YouTube, but their own, internet properties.
Which is perfectly fine. I mean, it's the choice of going to a large store which has 500 products in the store or setting up your own specialty store, and both models exist out there. The question is, where do you want your content to be? And if I was a content producer, I'd want it at both places, right? Because today the quality of the stores is not different. Like, would I rather have it in my own specialty store, or would I set up one in a mall, or would I want to set it up on my own separately? If you want to set it up on your own, it's great, you can. It just does a lot more money to go and create awareness and distribution of that. YouTube is already where awareness exists, Tens of millions of people in every country watch YouTube, so they know how to get there. So if you can find a way of putting great content out there and we can showcase it, you're likely to get higher usage, which is, I think, that is more of the imperative for content producers than to go out and create their own website, their own store, which are both possible. They're both being done.
I've been getting some hyper-local feedback in terms of the time remaining.
I know, I've seen somebody walk up with really good boards saying you have X minutes. How many minutes do we have?
I think we're being encouraged to wrap it up. But for all of us in the content business, what should we be thinking about, worrying about, focusing on in the year ahead?
I think if there's one message I could leave you guys with, as I said, at the end of the day, consumers consume content. They don't consume YouTube, they don't consume CBC, they don't consume a broadcaster, they consume great content. And I think, as I said last night, you guys are doing a phenomenal job of keeping people informed and entertained. And I just would encourage you to apply that same creativity in trying to look at the various technological capabilities that have been created in the world out there, whether it's social media, whether it's online platforms like YouTube, whether it's Google+, whether it's smartphones, and the ability for us to discover content wherever we are and have it constantly available to us. And I think that's the opportunity for us in the future, is how do we take the new formats, take the new opportunities that technology gives us and embrace it and create content that is in time or in lockstep with the consumption behavior of my daughter and your kids, because they're going to consume content very differently. And we're going to have to make sure we enable them to be able to do that, or else there will be new people who create that new content for them.
Right. Fantastic. Thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for waking up early.